Boy, there's just something about Murakami, isn't there? I mean that in a completely neutral way, because there is something about Murakami, and if you're into it, then boy, you're gonna love this man. And if you're not into it, go find a different author, because you're gonna get about one book in and you're gonna go, "F this, I'm out." Maybe two if you find a mild one for your first one. But I love that. I love that about anyone. I would so much rather somebody swing for the fences and completely miss than to play it safe and just feed you kind of something drab. Like, take The Expanse, for example. That is the safest, safe series of all safe series. And it bored me to tears. Actually, it wasn't a bad series at all. But my point is, I'd much rather somebody go just bat crazy and give me something just completely nuts than to give me something super duper safe. You know, as much as I hated Endymion, at least he was going for it. And you know what I mean? So yeah, I'd rather dislike your series and it have gone for something than to actually enjoy your series and it was just bland. That being said, well, let's talk about Murakami. And here's the thing. I read 1Q84. You know why? I forget who recommended that, and I jumped on it. I think it was Adam Savage, to be quite honest. I saw Adam Savage recommend it. I was like, oh, this sounds like a good book, and I read it, and it was phenomenal. I mean, just amazing. And then I was right in the middle of kind of dabbling with some folio books, and I saw this beautiful, lovely little, I mean, just phenomenal. Hold on. Just, oh my goodness. So I grabbed it. Anyway, so I read Kafka on the Shore. And by the way, if you I'm gonna go broke buying these books, because they're just the most wonderful. They're just the most wonderful things I've ever laid my hands on as far as books are concerned. And the reading, I'm in the middle of reading Book of the New Sun in the folio edition, and just the reading experience itself is just legitimately next level. And then I finished reading this, which I thought was a gamble. You know, you read one book and sure, I loved it. Do you just go spend folio edition money on another one? Well, that's what I did. And boy, was it ever worth it. Because not only is the book amazing, but the book itself, the content is amazing. And then, I know we'll get to the book review. And then, I enjoyed those two books back to back so much that I now have an entire shelf of Murakami books that I went out and bought a bunch of little paperbacks and all that, you know. I went and bought just a bunch of them and put together a whole shelf for this man, just because I enjoy his writing that much, and I'm not going to read them all right away, although I am kind of, as of right now, I'm like in the middle of Wind Up Bird Chronicle, which is whatever. But he's very quickly becoming like one of my top 5 authors, like no joke. 2 books, and I think he might be in the top 5 of my favorite authors, like that, just that quick. Anyway, that's a discussion for another video. How many books does it take before you know that you love an author? I think I'll make that video. Anyway, also, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this video spoiler free, because the other format that I really lean into is book discussions. And this is my second Murakami book ever that I've ever read. And I've only read this book once. And this book really almost begs for multiple readings to understand it better. So having only read it once, and it having only been my second Murakami book, I probably am not qualified to do a book discussion on this book. But what I can do is a spoiler-free book review. So, in typical Murakami fashion, this book is a surreal experience of magical realism, bonanza extravaganza. I don't know. But it is. And similar to 1Q84, you have two main characters that you follow separately. You know, this chapter is one character, the next chapter is the next. And you just leapfrog through the book that way between your two main characters who have literally absolutely nothing to do with each other. Their storylines have nothing to do with each other, or seemingly have nothing to do with each other. They do not intersect until the very end, and then you start to see how they're related or what they have in common. But for the, you know, for the majority of the book, they are just seemingly separate entities that you follow. Now, one main character number one, Nakata. You would think Nagata. Is it Nagata? Otsuka? Oh, these names. If I ever have to pronounce a name, any name, I don't even care if it's American, just assume that I don't know how. Anyway, but you got the little old man. He had an accident as a child, and he now can speak with cats. He's also dumb in his own words because he's just he's handicapped in some way, shape, or form. It's not really clear, but he's very mentally handicapped. And he'll just tell people he's dumb. But now he can talk to cats. And he walks around, he has conversations with them, and he helps people find their lost cats. And he lives off of the government because he has a subsidy. And, you know, I mean, it's just, oh my gosh, he's the most wonderful character. He's the most lovable old man. He is just so much fun to read. You would just eat this little old man up. He's just the best. He's fun, he's funny, he's heartwarming. His conversations that he has with the cats, I cannot gush about this one character enough. He is the best part of the whole book, easy. And the plot and the story that surrounds him, and he's not introduced in a typical way. It's more like he's introduced through like weird reports of the accident that he had as a child. Actually, it was him, and it was like an entire class full of kids that had this accident, but he's the one that's weird. So even his introduction is atypical, but he's just fantastic. So then your other main character is Kafka, of course, Kafka on the Shore. And Kafka is a 15-year-old boy. He's a runaway. He ran away from home where he lived with his dad. It was just him and his dad in the house. And his dad might have been a crappy guy. He might not have been a crappy guy. It's not entirely clear. He certainly perceives him as a horrible person. But is it because he was actually a terrible dad? Or is it just because Kafka's just an idiot 15-year-old? Never actually made clear. His dad might have cursed him. He might not have cursed him. So at some point in the book, he may have killed his father. He might not have killed his father. None of this is clear. At no point is any of this ever made clear. Anyway, although what is clear, and what is very clear from pretty much the beginning of the book on, as far as I can tell, is that Kafka is by and large just unlikable. He's just a very unlikable main character to have for a book. If I knew Kafka in real life, I would probably describe him as insufferable. I'm not sure if he was supposed to be relatable, and he was supposed to come across as like sympathetic, and with his backstory and his struggle, and you know, I ran away from home because I had a bad home life. So is he supposed to be, you know, like this real sympathetic character that you're supposed to feel bad for, and it's supposed to be this his journey through striving for independence and a real true coming of age story that you are following him and rooting for him the whole time, and because it didn't come across that way if that was the intent. Now, to be fair, in the end, I do feel like it was relatively solid coming of age story. I think that there is a story and a character movement for this character, and growth. Big question mark on the growth there. But a coming of age story of sorts for him. That is, I've actually there. But for him to be relatable and identifiable or sympathetic is not the case. It's a very strange approach at a coming-of-age story, at least coming from somebody who read a lot of Stephen King, who you have all these, one of the best coming-of-age authors ever, and then you read this and you're like, this isn't what I'm used to. This guy's just kind of like the worst. I mean, just the worst. He's a little and you don't like him. I didn't like him at all. But aside from Kafka, speaking of characters, Murakami's characters are just absolutely amazing. They are so weird, and they're so strange, and they're so just, none of them act, think, or behave in any way that you would expect normal people to think, act, and behave. Some of them are fun, some of them are funny, some of them are goofy, some of them are just weird. Some of them will get in a situation and then they will act or say something you're like, nobody in the history of time would ever react that way, but his characters will just do that. They will just say and think and do everything, and then out of nowhere, you'll have one will break off into just weird philosophizing sometimes. More likely that they'll get into a discussion about jazz music or some classical orchestral piece that you've never heard of. That they will have some real deep discussion, like legitimately deep discussion about the inner workings of this classical piece of music for far longer than you probably should be having this discussion in the middle of a book. You're like, oh, Haruki, what are you doing here? Though I find it fascinating. To me, it adds character and flavor to the book, but be warned that this is going to happen to you in the middle of this book. The characters, I have a lot more warnings for you here coming up in a second. But in terms of characters, you have some, they're just so unique, and you've got this. Basically, his characters are so strange and unique, and they are written with such a flavor and a flair that they end up being a high point in the book, even when they're unlikable. Now, to warnings, big flag warnings. I feel obligated to warn you that there's just very weird stuff in this book, like the tangents, where people will just randomly start talking about music for longer than you would expect. There's some weird sex stuff. There's some weird penis stuff. He will go into very strange descriptions of his penis, which he normally refers to as his cock, throughout the entire book. Like, he'll be washing it, and I'll be like, I washed my cock very well. And you're like, well, good for you, I guess. Yeah. And there is a dream sequence inside of the book that is particularly unsettling. If you were reading the book, and you're like, oh, no, this Kafka guy is not that bad, is he? I guess he's not as terrible as John said he was. Then you get to the dream sequence and you're like, oh, yeah, he is. Yeah, he's kind of just the worst. It's not all sunshine and roses. There's some really strange things going on in this book. So in conclusion, you essentially have a book that is one big puzzle that is then made up of puzzles within puzzles to which you're not going to get answers. Then that book is headlined and even named after a character named Kafka, who is essentially unlikable to his core. So you have a book of puzzles that doesn't give you answers and an unlikable main character. How can that be a good book? I don't know. There's just a magic in the writing. There's a magic in the way he builds the world is just something you just kind of want to live there. Not really, because it's kind of terrible sometimes and there's horrible things happening sometimes, but page after page after page. It's just a joy to read. And it's an experience to be had. And it's an experience that I love having. His style of writing is just so wonderful, even if there are no answers and the main character's a douche. Now, what would I give this? I don't know. I feel like it's better than an 8, but I gave 1Q84 a 9. And I don't think this is as good as 1Q84. And that's probably an unpopular opinion, because I think everybody's list that I've seen of Kafka on the Shore always goes above 1Q84 as far as ranking is concerned. And I don't think it does. There was just something about that one that was just, boy, this one's good. I was going to give it an 8.5, but this might be a 9. Can two books have the same number, but one be better? I'm going to give it an 8.5.